Chapter 1. The Collapse. Mary had left the house at 8:15, her purse over one shoulder and a small Irish cream bottle already tucked inside it. Simba had been sitting by the front door when she came through from the kitchen, not blocking it exactly, just present, in the way cats made their feelings known without ever quite stating them. He watched her gather her keys and her bag with the steady, unblinking attention of someone cataloguing a departure. "I'll be back," she told him. He blinked once. The opinion was reserved. She scratched behind his ear, which he tolerated, and went. The bell over the door at a slice of Paris chimed softly as Mary stepped inside. Warm, familiar, safe. Butter and sugar lingered in the air, layered with a deeper comfort of fresh coffee and warm pastry, and underneath it all, the faint sweetness of almond. Michelle had been baking since early morning. You could always tell. The display case held what it always held on a Saturday. The guava and cream cheese croissants that people drove from Fort Pierce for. The cow and almond that caramelized at the edges the way nothing else quite did. The pain au chocolat that Michelle made with Venezuelan chocolate and refused to source cheaper. And, at the far left, already half gone, the almond croissants, made from yesterday's plain croissants soaked overnight in frangipane, and baked again until the outside shattered and the inside was dense and almost custardy. Toffa Grant had noticed those. Mary would think about later, the almond ones, specifically. Sunlight spilled through the front windows, catching the glass display case and chalkboard menus, softening the edges of everything it touched. Mary paused just inside the door. Carol was already there. She was standing just to the right of the entrance, her glasses on, the metaframes she'd had for 8 months, slim and unobtrusive, that most people didn't register as anything other than ordinary eyewear. She had them angled slightly toward the chalkboard menu above the counter. "Specials today," the glasses said quietly, in the small voice only she could hear. "Guava and cream cheese croissant, café con." A pause. Café con leche. Another pause. Unable to read. Possible glare. Carol sighed under her breath. The chalkboard was hand-lettered in Michelle's looping script, and it defeated the glasses approximately 40% of the time. Carol had considered mentioning this to Michelle. She had not, because Michelle's handwriting was beautiful and it wasn't Michelle's job to let her print for a machine. "Morning," she said instead, to the room. "Over here," Nancy called from near the pastry case. Carol oriented toward Nancy's voice, and moved through the space with the ease of someone who had been here enough times to know the floor plan without needing to see it. 3 steps from the door, slight left to clear the display case edge, then straight to where the counter stool sat. Mary came through the door a moment later. After New Mexico, she had started noticing moments like this more carefully, the ordinary ones, the ones that didn't ask anything from you, the ones that stayed. "This was the right decision," she said quietly. "It usually is," Carol said. Nancy was already there. She stood near the pastry case with one hand wrapped around a coffee cup, posture relaxed, but not casual. Nancy was never casual, even at rest. She watched. "You're late," Nancy said. Mary checked her watch. By 43 seconds. Nancy took a slow sip. "A pattern is a pattern." Carol laughed softly. "I'm glad some things in life remain dependable." Behind the counter, Michelle looked up and broke into a smile. "There you are." Sam appeared a second later, carrying a tray, flour dusting the front of his shirt. "We made it official," Michelle said. "You caught us before escape." Mary placed a hand over her chest. "You were really going to leave the country without a proper goodbye?" "We considered it," Sam said solemnly. Michelle rolled her eyes. "Ignore him." They gathered near the counter, the bakery moving easily around them, cups touching saucers, quiet conversations drifting, the steady hiss of the espresso machine. Athena, the bakery cat, lounged on her stool near the register like a small queen. She was grey, the blue-grey of early morning fog, with green eyes that missed nothing and conveyed a great deal. When Carol paused nearby, Athena stretched, hopped down, and wound once around her ankles. "Well, hello to you too," Carol said, reaching down to scratch behind one soft ear. "She's been supervising all morning," Michelle said. "Poorly," Sam added. Athena blinked slowly. Mary smiled and let herself settle into it. This was what she loved about a slice of Paris, not just the pastries, though those certainly didn't hurt, but the feeling that time behaved better here. People slowed, voices softened, even goodbyes felt manageable. Mary glanced toward the wall behind the counter where a small collection of framed items hung, photos, certificates, and one piece that always caught her attention. A gold medal, set neatly inside a shadow box, the ribbon folded just so, the metal catching the light in a way that felt quietly proud rather than showy. "What's that one from again?" Mary asked, nodding toward it. Michelle turned, following her gaze. "Regional pastry competition, a few years ago." Sam grinned. "She says that like it wasn't a big deal." "It wasn't," Michelle said. "It was," Sam corrected. "She beat people who take butter very seriously." Nancy leaned in to get a better look. "It's beautiful." "Where is it?" Carol asked. Mary smiled. "Back wall, just to the right of the espresso machine." Carol nodded, orienting herself to the space. Mary looked at it one more time, the gold catching the morning light, exactly where it belonged. "So," Mary said, "tell us again where you're staying." Michelle leaned against the counter. "A village outside Tours. Stone walls, uneven floors, probably terrible plumbing, and almost no internet," Sam added. Nancy nodded. "Bold choice." "It was intentional," Michelle said. "We wanted quiet." Carol spoke. "Real quiet or romantic idea of quiet?" Michelle laughed. "Probably the second one." "We'll take pictures," Sam said. "If the signal cooperates," Michelle added. Mary smiled. "Text when you can. We'll worry less." Near the window, an elderly couple sat over the remnants of their breakfast, heads tilted toward each other in the easy way of people who had been having the same conversation for decades. The man was gesturing toward the pastry case. The woman was shaking her head, smiling despite herself. Mary watched them for a moment. "Are those the guava pastries?" she asked Michelle, nodding toward the couple's plate. Michelle glanced over. "They are. We just started making them again. They smell wonderful," Mary said. The woman at the window table looked up. "They're just like the ones we used to get in Miami," she said pleasantly. 40 years ago." Mary smiled. "That good?" The woman laughed. "Better." Her husband leaned over and helped himself to the last piece. She swatted his hand. Too late. He looked entirely unrepentant. Nancy, who had drifted back toward the pastry case, paused. A woman was standing nearby, well-dressed, unhurried. Dark bag held close. A strand of glossy red beads at her throat, bright against neutral clothing. Nancy noticed the beads first. Then she noticed Topher. Topher Grant had come in without fanfare, the way he usually did. A lift of the hand toward the counter, a nod to Sam. His bakery on 6th Avenue had a reputation, European-inspired, artisanal, the kind of place that took its single-origin coffee seriously. Less cozy than a slice of Paris, more considered. The two shops occupied different corners of the same world, and their owners had always seemed quietly amused by the comparison. He stepped up beside the woman at the pastry case. Something passed between them, brief, familiar. Not strangers, but not close either. The ease of people who had managed some small inconvenience together at some point and moved on. He said something to her, quietly, pleasantly, the way you mention a small errand to a neighbor. Nancy caught two words, package and interesting. The woman's expression didn't change. She nodded once, the composed acknowledgement of someone filing information away. But her hand, Nancy noticed, tightened slightly on the strap of her bag. Just for a moment. The woman broke a small piece from the pastry she was holding and offered it to him. He took it without hesitation. Nancy watched for a half-second longer, then picked up a plate of guava pastries for the table, and turned back toward Mary and Carol. Nothing about it had seemed worth mentioning. Carol went still for a moment, listening to something at the edge of the room she couldn't quite place. A shift in the sound, a change in the small rhythms of the space. Not alarming, just there, then gone. At the window, the elderly couple were still debating something. Mary was still smiling at them. "What do you think?" Michelle asked, sliding a plate toward them. "One last round before we disappear?" "Now you're speaking my language," Mary said. For a few minutes, everything stayed pleasantly ordinary. They talked about airports and packing and the small worries that came with leaving home. Someone laughed near the window. Athena abandoned her stool and wandered toward the back, nosing along the baseboards near the storage shelves with the focused intention of the cat, who had decided something back there needed attending to. She disappeared behind the flower bins for a moment, long enough that a staff member went to check on her, then reappeared and settled into a patch of sunlight as if nothing had happened. The staff member looked mildly puzzled. "She's been doing that all week," she said to no one in particular. "Normal. Steady." Topher had drifted toward the counter. He glanced over the display with the attention of someone who always noticed what other people were doing with butter and flour. "You heading out today?" he said to Michelle. "In about 10 minutes," Michelle said. "If we actually leave when we say we will." Topher nodded. "France, right?" Mary blinked. "Word travels fast. Small town," Topher said. "Sam mentioned it last week." Sam shrugged. "I brag." Nancy watched quietly. Carol listened, not to the words, but to the rhythm beneath them. Everything felt easy, unforced. Then Michelle checked the time. "We should go," she said, more firmly now. "If we don't leave, we're going to regret it." Sam didn't argue. "Yeah, let's move." Goodbyes came quicker this time. "Text when you land," Mary said. "I will," Michelle promised. Sam grabbed his keys. "Don't let the place fall apart." Nancy lifted her coffee. "No guarantees." Carol smiled. "Safe travels." Topher stepped slightly aside to give them room. "Have a good trip," he said. "Thanks," Michelle replied. The bell chimed as they stepped outside. Mary watched through the window as they crossed the sidewalk. Sam unlocked the car. Michelle slid into the passenger seat. The engine turned, and then they were gone. For a moment, the bakery paused. Then it resumed. Topher turned back to the counter. "So," he said, "what am I missing today?" "Everything," Nancy said. Topher smiled. He rested one hand on the counter, looking over the pastries. Mary reached for her coffee. Carol went still. Something shifted. Not loudly. Not enough for anyone to name. Just wrong. A chair scraped. Too fast. Too sharp. Nancy turned at the same moment. Mary looked up. Topher's knees buckled. One hand braced hard against the counter. For a split second, Mary thought, too fast. But he didn't steady. He swayed, reached, missed, and collapsed. The sound cut through the bakery. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then, "Oh my God, is he okay? Call 911. Nancy was already there. "Don't touch him," she said. "Give him space." She dropped beside him. "Topher, can you hear me?" Mary crossed the room without thinking. "Has anyone called 911? Nancy asked. "I am," someone shouted. "Good." Carol stood still for half a second longer, listening. Topher's breathing was wrong. Shallow. Uneven. Too fast. "Nancy?" Carol called. "I'm here," Nancy answered. Carol nodded once. Mary crouched beside them. "What do you need?" Nancy leaned closer, and then she smelled it. Not strong. Not obvious. Something sharp and bitter cutting through the room, and underneath it, still present, the warm sweetness of almond pastry from Michelle's morning bake. The two smells were layered together, tangled. The sharp edge of one lost against the softness of the other. Wrong. But she couldn't quite separate them. Nancy frowned. "What?" Mary asked. Nancy hesitated. "Nothing. Maybe nothing." Topher didn't respond. Sam was gone. Michelle was gone. The woman with the red bead stood near the door now, still, not moving toward the commotion, not moving away from it, just watching. Her hand rested lightly on the strap of her bag. Her expression gave nothing. At the window table, the elderly couple sat motionless, the last guava pastry forgotten between them. Sirens rose in the distance. Closer, closer. By the time the paramedics arrived, the bakery had fallen into an unnatural quiet. Nancy stepped back as they took over. "He collapsed suddenly," she said. "One second he was standing, the next, down." A paramedic glanced up. "Anything unusual?" Nancy hesitated. Mary looked at her. "There was a smell," Nancy said. "Sharp, bitter, hard to place." The bakery was already full of almond, but something underneath it. Wrong. The paramedic nodded and went back to work. Outside, the bright Florida sun felt rude. A staff member appeared in the doorway and turned the sign to closed, then pulled the door gently shut behind her. She stood there for a moment, not sure what to do next, before going back inside. Mary stood beside Carol and Nancy on the sidewalk and stared at the door. A few minutes ago they had been saying goodbye to friends going to France. A few minutes ago Athena had been winding around Carol's ankles. A few minutes ago the woman with the beautiful red beads had been only a passing detail in a pleasant room. Now Topher Grant was in an ambulance. The bakery was closed, and something important, had shifted. One of the staff, a young woman Mary didn't know by name, came out through the side door with her apron still on, looking shaken. She paused beside them. "The strangest thing," she said, not really to anyone. "I went to get the good sugar spoon, the silver one Michelle keeps for the coffee tastings, and it's just gone. I've looked everywhere." She shook her head. "This whole morning feels wrong." She went back inside. Mary looked at the bakery door. A man in an ambulance. A missing spoon. Sam and Michelle on a plane to France. It probably meant nothing, but it sat with her anyway. Nancy folded her arms. Carol listened to the altered rhythm of the street. Mary swallowed hard. Before this morning, life had felt predictable. After this morning, none of them knew what anything would look like, and that uncertainty settled over the three of them. As the sirens faded into the distance and left silence behind. Chapter 2. 2 days earlier. By the first week of October, Vero Beach began to feel crowded in a way locals noticed before they ever named it. The air was still warm, the palms still green. But parking took longer. Restaurant patios filled faster, and unfamiliar voices drifted through places that usually felt like extensions of home. Snowbirds were beginning to arrive, chasing sun, routine, and the idea of a softer season. And while most of them were harmless enough, their presence changed the texture of town. Carol Zeller noticed immediately, not by sight, of course, but by rhythm. Chairs scraped more often along restaurant patios. Car doors shut in uneven bursts. People paused in the wrong places, hesitated at thresholds, asked for directions in voices that carried just a little too brightly. None of it was unpleasant, just different, and Carol had learned to pay attention to different. She and Mary arrived at the Green Marlin a little after 4, the late afternoon light still hot on the sidewalks but beginning to soften around the edges. Mary walked half a step ahead, guiding them through the familiar path to their usual table on the patio. Chairs right in front of you, Mary said. Carol reached out, found the chair back, and sat with practiced ease. Thank you. Nancy was already there, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, a glass of Pinot Grigio waiting in front of her. Across from her sat Natalie and Ron. Natalie lifted a hand. There you are. Ron smiled. We were about to order for you and get everything wrong. You still have time, Nancy said. Mary laughed as she took her seat. That would require effort. Casey appeared almost immediately, setting down their usual drinks without needing to ask. A vodka tonic with lime for Mary, a double bourbon with 1 ice cube for Carol, and a fresh glass of Pinot Grigio for Nancy. You all doing food too? Casey asked. We are, Mary said. I'm not making responsible choices later, so I might as well start now. I'll give you a minute, Casey said. Marcy appeared a moment later, not because she was needed, but because she had seen them come in and had a minute and intended to use it. She leaned against the edge of the table with the comfortable ease of someone who had been doing this for 20 years and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. How was New Mexico? She said. You never really told me. Mary wrapped both hands around her glass. She'd been asked that a dozen times since they'd gotten back. By her neighbor, by her dentist, by the woman at the post office. She'd said wonderful every time, and beautiful, and we really needed a trip. All of which were true and none of which were the whole story. It was something else, she said finally. Marcy nodded like that was the answer she'd been waiting for. She didn't push. That was one of the things Mary had always appreciated about her. She knew the difference between a story a person wanted to tell, and one they were still figuring out how to carry. Carol came in last week, Marcy offered. Said the same thing. Something else. She smiled. Nancy said educational. That sounds like Nancy, Mary said. Pinot Grigio and a straight face. Marcy glanced at Carol. Whatever happened out there, it looks good on all three of you. I don't know how else to put it. Mary took a slow sip and looked out toward the street, where the late afternoon light was cutting long in gold across the parking lot, and the palm trees along US 1. She thought about the elk meadow and the particular hush of it. She thought about Carol's voice in the dark, steady, saying keep moving, keep moving. She'd been turning certain things over ever since. Still wasn't sure what to do with all of it. Thanks, Marcy, she said quietly. Marcy was already moving, already straightening, already back to the work of the room. Always, Marcy called over her shoulder, without looking back. Nancy leaned back, scanning the patio. Tell me you can feel it, she said. Mary glanced around. What, exactly? October. Carol tilted her face toward the breeze drifting in through the open door. It wasn't cooler, not really, but it had changed. It moved more cleanly somehow, with less weight. I can, Carol said. It's subtle, but it's there. Natalie smiled. That's what I was saying to Ron. Ron looked amused. You all talk about seasons like they've committed to a group text. They do, Nancy said. You just don't listen. Mary shook her head, smiling. The conversation drifted, as it often did, toward plans. Carol shared her news first. "I got confirmation this morning," Carol said. "David Thompson is coming." Nancy looked up. "The one from West Palm. The Sebastian Group swears by him." "Good," Nancy said simply. Mary smiled. "And the walk?" "October 15th, Carol said. "Same as always." She set her glass down. "He's coming to the first Friday meeting at the Institute first, Indian River Boulevard, then staying through for the walk." Natalie leaned forward. "I'm still happy to help however you need. Flyers, logistics, calls, whatever." "I know," Carol said warmly, "and I appreciate it." Ron lifted his glass. "I'm mostly moral support unless someone needs folding chairs moved." "That is also a contribution," Mary said. "See," Ron said to Natalie, "I'm a pillar." Nancy let out a short laugh. "Let's not get reckless." Ron set his glass down. "The auction is coming up too," he said. "Treasure Coast, Jupiter." Nancy looked at him. "The shipwreck one?" "The 1715 fleet," Ron said. He said it the way people said things they'd been thinking about for a while. 11 ships went down in a hurricane off this coast, right off Vero Beach. He shook his head. 300 years of artifacts sitting on the ocean floor, and some of them at auction, Natalie said, smiling. "Some of them," Ron agreed. "There's a piece in the preview that I want to see in person." "Lot 42, Natalie said. Ron looked at her. "You remembered. You've mentioned it," Natalie said, "more than once." The table smiled. Natalie stirred her drink with a little red straw. "My neighbor won a trip last month," she said. "Some kind of sweepstakes." Mary looked up. "A real one?" Natalie nodded. "Las Vegas. Flights, hotel, the whole thing." Ron snorted softly. "There's always a catch." "That's because you assume joy is suspicious," Natalie said. Nancy lifted a shoulder. "He's not wrong. I heard about another one too," Natalie continued. "Someone won a trip to Hawaii." Mary sighed. "I never win anything." "Maybe you're not entering the right things," Nancy said. Carol smiled faintly. "What would you even want to win?" That shifted the whole table. Mary leaned back, considering it seriously. "Somewhere old. Portugal, maybe. Or Spain. Good food. History. Streets that have been walked on for centuries." "That sounds like you," Nancy said. Carol took a small sip of bourbon. "I'd want the beach. Somewhere where I could hear the ocean all the time." Natalie smiled. "That sounds exactly right for you." Ron pointed lightly at Nancy. "Maine." Nancy looked at him. "How did you know that?" "You say lighthouse the way other people say church." Mary laughed. Nancy lifted her glass. "Yes. Maine. Cold mornings. Coastline. Lobster rolls that require commitment." "I'm writing this down," Nancy said. Carol smiled. "Please do. We're building future delusions." Marcy arrived. She didn't just walk up. She arrived, notepad in hand, expression sharp with interest. At the Green Marlin, Marcy wasn't just a server. She was a hub. She knew the servers at the Ocean Grill, the bartenders downtown, the kitchen staff at half the restaurants in Vero. Orders, complaints, breakups, rumors. If it moved through the local restaurant scene, it eventually moved through Marcy, which meant, if something was happening in town, Marcy knew it. "All right, ladies, gentlemen," she said. "What are we feeding this table today?" They ordered in the easy, overlapping way of people who'd done this 100 times before. Mary changed her mind halfway through. Nancy did not. Carol asked about the fish special, listened carefully, then chose something else entirely. Marcy scribbled everything down. "You know," she said, with theatrical seriousness, "when it's deer season, people get to hunt deer." She let that sit. "So if it's tourist season, shouldn't we be able to?" The table broke into laughter. Ron shook his head. "That feels legally complicated. Only if you get caught," Marcy said. Deadpan, then grinned and headed back inside. The laughter lingered for a moment. Then the mood settled. Quieter, more focused. And that's when Marcy returned. She set down a basket of fries no one had technically ordered and leaned in slightly. "So," she said, lowering her voice just enough to signal value, "word is there's a strange woman hanging around a slice of Paris." Mary frowned. "Strange how?" Marcy lifted one shoulder. "Notebook. Questions. Watching people work like she's with the pastry police." Nancy's brow lifted. "That is strange. Who is she?" Carol asked. Marcy shook her head. "Don't know. Somebody said her name might be Blanchette. Beverly something." She's been in more than once. Sam and Michelle are leaving for France at the end of the week, heading out Saturday morning. Maybe she's trying to get a look before the good people leave. Where did you hear that? Mary asked. About France. Michelle mentioned it, Marcy said. She's been talking about it for months. They've got a whole trip planned. Bakeries, markets, the whole thing. She shook her head admiringly. Good for them. October's a fine time to go. And the bakery? Nancy asked. Staying open, Marcy said. The staff are lovely. She made a small gesture. They're not Sam and Michelle. Nobody argued with that. Maybe she's a food critic, Ron said. Marcy made a face. Honey, if she's a food critic, then I'm a duchess. Natalie laughed into her drink. She buying things? Nancy asked. Marcy nodded. Apparently, just also hovering. You know how some people make interested look suspicious? Like that. Carol smiled faintly. That is a gift. Well, if she starts stealing croissants, I'll let you know, Marcy said. Though honestly, if you've had Michelle's croissants, you'd understand the impulse. She does something to the butter layers that nobody else around here does. I don't know what it is. It sounds like a cult when I try to explain it. She moved off down the bar. Just emotional stability, Mary said. Marcy pointed her pen at her. Kitchen closes at 9. When she was gone, the table sat with the information. Blanchette, Nancy said. That's memorable. It sounds like either a pastry or an accusation, Mary said. Carol traced one finger lightly along the edge of her glass. Probably harmless. Maybe, Nancy said. But Mary heard it. That slight shift. Not suspicion. Not yet. Just attention. The quiet click of Nancy filing something away. The conversation drifted again. White cane awareness plans. Ron returning briefly to Lot 42 and the plate fleet. Nancy promising to send sweepstakes links in what she called a civilized format. You mean a spreadsheet? Mary said. I mean order, Nancy replied. Ron smiled. Those are the same thing to Nancy. Because chaos is exhausting. As the light softened into that golden Vero Beach glow, the meal wound down. Chairs shifted. Glasses emptied. Plans half made. Mary stood first. I'm glad we did this. Carol rose beside her. We usually are. Natalie lifted her bag. I'll call you tomorrow. Nancy pulled out her phone. Before we go, she said, everyone enters these 3. She set the phone on the table and turned it so they could see. It takes 4 minutes. That's 4 minutes I could spend finishing my bourbon, Carol said. Enter the sweepstakes, Nancy said. They entered the sweepstakes. They parted in the parking lot with hugs and easy goodbyes. As Mary guided Carol toward the car, she glanced back once. At the patio. At Marcy weaving between tables. At the steady rhythm of late afternoon carrying on exactly as it should. Nothing about the day had felt ominous. Not really. A strange woman with a notebook. Ron's excitement about old ships. Just details. Just life, arranging itself. They just didn't know yet which ones would matter. Chapter 3, Hospital Chairs. They were only at the hospital because the officer had asked them to stay. He'd taken their names outside the bakery, writing carefully in a small notebook while the paramedics worked. He was efficient and courteous. The kind of courteous that came with a brand of professional neutrality. The kind that treated 3 older women at a crisis scene as reliable witnesses to approximately nothing. Then he looked up at Nancy. You noticed something, he said. Not accusing. Curious. A smell. Nancy had hesitated. It sounded strange now, standing in bright daylight outside the bakery with people watching and the door closed behind them. It sounded like something imagined after the fact. The kind of detail that attached itself to memories, when you needed them to mean more than they did. But she had nodded. It may be nothing, the officer said, but if the doctors have questions, it helps if you're nearby. So they stayed. They rode to the hospital in Nancy's car, trailing the ambulance at a careful distance, nobody speaking. Mary sat in the passenger seat with her purse in her lap, and both hands wrapped around the strap. Carol sat in the back, very still, her cane across her knees. The morning had been ordinary 40 minutes ago. Now it was this. The waiting room was too bright. That was Mary's first thought. Fluorescent lights running the full length of the ceiling, bleaching everything to a flat, airless white. The kind of light that made people look slightly wrong, slightly flattened. The color drained from their faces. She had been in waiting rooms before. They never got easier. She found 3 chairs together along the near wall and guided Carol to the middle one. Not because Carol needed guiding. but because the impulse to be useful was the only thing keeping Mary's hands occupied, Carol sat without comment, tapping the floor once with her cane to orient herself, and folded it across her lap. Nancy took the chair on Carol's other side. They arranged themselves the way they always arranged themselves, Mary on one side, Nancy on the other, Carol at the center, and settled into wait. The room was full without being crowded. A man in his 50s sat 2 chairs down, hands loose between his knees, staring at the floor with the hollow look of someone who had been here for hours. A young woman across the room was texting with frantic speed, and the look of someone delivering news they didn't want to deliver. An older couple near the window held hands and didn't speak. A nurse moved past without looking at them, then an orderly, then a man in a white coat who glanced up from his tablet, scanned the room, and looked back down. Not one of them paused. Mary felt it, the feeling of being entirely unremarkable. 3 older women in a hospital waiting room. Nothing unusual, nothing that required attention. She had felt it before, for most of her life. Actually, the slow accretion of it. The way the world gradually stopped registering women past a certain age as requiring much consideration. You became part of the furniture. Background. Present but not particularly relevant. She had spent years finding it maddening. Sitting here now, she was revising that position. They were invisible, and invisible, she was beginning to understand, was not the same as powerless. She made a decision. Instead of trying to flag down a nurse or position herself near the desk or do any of the things a visible person might do to get information, she settled back in her chair and simply watched. Through the gap between 2 people across the room, she had a clear sight line to the double doors. She kept her eyes there and kept her expression neutral and unremarkable, and waited to see what passed through. Nobody adjusted their behavior for 3 older women sitting quietly in a waiting room, which meant she would see what people actually did, rather than what they did when they knew they were being watched. She wasn't sure yet how much that would be worth. She suspected it might be worth quite a lot. Carol, for her part, was not wasting the time. The fluorescent lights had a hum, low and constant, a frequency that sat just below conscious attention unless you knew to listen for it. She had found it within 30 seconds of sitting down. She had also found the air conditioning vent above and to the left, the rhythm of the air it pushed, warm at the edges, cool at the center. The pattern of footsteps in the corridor beyond the double doors, soft-soled shoes moving quickly, nurses, harder soles moving deliberately, doctors, irregular shuffles that stopped and started, patients or visitors uncertain of their direction, the faint chemical smell, antiseptic, yes, and something beneath it, sweeter and more artificial, the kind of thing institutions use to suggest cleanliness without quite achieving it, and the sounds of the room itself. The man 2 chairs down breathed through his mouth, slow and heavy. The young woman's phone made a tiny sound each time she sent a message. The couple by the window, the woman shifted every few minutes. The man didn't shift at all. Carol had learned, over years, that rooms had emotional tones the way music had keys. This room was in a minor key, fearful and waiting. The particular frequency of people who didn't know what was coming and couldn't make it come faster. She understood it completely. Mary finally broke the silence. "How are you doing?" Nancy let out a short breath. "Fine." Mary didn't answer. Nancy passed her hand briefly across her face. "Maybe not so fine." "That makes sense," Mary said quietly. Nancy stared at the double doors. "I keep replaying it." "That's what your brain does," Carol said, "when something doesn't fit." "I know," Nancy said. "I used to do this all the time. Calls like that. Collapses." She stopped. "You think you're ready and then it's always different." Mary leaned back. "You helped." "I don't know if I did." "You took control of the room," Carol said, immediately, before anyone else knew what was happening. Nancy was quiet for a moment. "That part I can do," she said. "It's the waiting I've never managed." She fell quiet. Then, after a moment, "I keep thinking about that smell." Mary glanced at her. "What about it?" Nancy rubbed her palms together slowly. "It didn't belong in that room, with all of that butter and sugar and coffee. Something cut through it, sharp, bitter, wrong." Mary thought about the bakery, the warmth of it, the density of good smells layered over each other. She tried to imagine something breaking through all of that, like cleaning supplies. She asked. "No." Nancy shook her head. "Not chemical clean. Different. More organic. Like something that grew somewhere. The way some herbs smell when you crush them. Medicinal. Not pleasant." Carol turned toward Nancy. "Describe the sharpness." Nancy thought about it for a moment. Sharp enough that I noticed it over the butter and almond and coffee. And that bakery is not a subtle smelling place. Whatever this was, it cut through. Christie, Carol said. Nancy looked at her. I beg your pardon? Agatha Christie, Carol said. The smell of bitter almonds appears in several of her novels as an indicator of cyanide poisoning. She was specific about it because she worked as a pharmacy dispenser during the First World War, and knew her chemistry. Nancy stared at her. You're telling me Agatha Christie is our current best reference? I'm telling you the association between a bitter almond smell and chemical poisoning is well established, and Christie documented it accurately, Carol said. What you describe may or may not be that, but if someone wanted to put something in a pastry that would cause a cardiac event, they would want something that was either odorless or masked by whatever the pastry already smelled like. The almond croissants, Mary said. She said it slowly, the way you said something when the pieces were arriving faster than you were ready for them. Topher ate the almond croissant. We saw Jill give it to him, and the whole bakery smells of almond. Michelle had been baking since early morning. If you wanted to hide a bitter almond smell, that would be, that's almost. She stopped, looked at Nancy. Is that too neat? Yes, Nancy said flatly, which is exactly what makes me think it might be right. The words settled into the air between them. Poison. Not spoken, just present. Mary felt it in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the tightening that came before fear, when the mind was still deciding how seriously to take something. She thought about Topher eating the piece of croissant without hesitation. The ease of it, the familiarity. That's either useful or terrible, she said. Probably both, Carol said. Though I should add, I may be entirely wrong and it may have been cyanide, which would also produce that smell. But cyanide in those quantities would have killed him on the spot, and he's still alive. So, she paused. Something else. Something slower. Nancy said nothing for a moment. I want to know what was in that croissant, she said. The next hour was long. Mary counted the ceiling tiles at one point. Not from boredom, but from the need to give her eyes somewhere to rest that wasn't the double doors. She reached 43 before she stopped. A nurse walked past their row, did not pause. Another orderly, a man in scrubs who looked directly at Nancy and then through her, toward something behind them. Nancy's jaw tightened slightly. Mary saw it, said nothing. Two nurses stopped near the water fountain 3 feet from their chairs and talked in the easy, unguarded way of people who had assessed their surroundings and found nothing requiring discretion. Because 3 older women sitting quietly with their coffees were not, in the professional calculation of a busy hospital corridor, anything requiring discretion. Mary listened. One nurse mentioned something about a toxicology screen taking longer than expected. The other said something about the ER having had 2 unusual presentations that week. Neither of them looked at the 3 women once. They moved on. Mary turned it over. Not Topher specifically, but the word toxicology, said casually, like a word in regular use today. She filed it. There was an art to being overlooked. You could resist it, announce yourself, demand attention, make your presence impossible to ignore, or you could let it work for you. She had been watching the double doors through the gap between 2 people across the room, unobserved, for 20 minutes. She had seen the doctor come out once, speak to the couple by the window, and go back in. She had watched the nurses' expressions as they passed through, readable, if you knew what to look for. Nothing alarmed, nothing urgent. She had learned more from being invisible than she would have from being noticed. The 3 of them, 3 women of a certain age in the hospital waiting room, existed in this space at the very edge of visibility. Too ordinary to register, too quiet to require management, which meant, if they were careful, they could see a great deal that other people couldn't. Do you think anyone here knows we were with him when it happened? Mary asked quietly. Nancy glanced at her. The officer took our names. The officer isn't here, Mary said. Nancy followed her gaze around the room. No, she said slowly. Nobody here knows anything about us except that we're waiting. Mary nodded. Which means nobody's managing what we hear. Carol's hands rested still in her lap. That has been my experience of most public spaces, she said, without particular emphasis. Nancy looked at her for a moment. Then, very quietly, she laughed. Okay, Nancy said. I see what you mean. Carol had something else. She hadn't said it yet because she was still examining it, turning it over in the way she turned things over when she wasn't certain enough to state them, and not willing to discard them either. The moment before he fell, she had been facing away when it happened, toward the window, listening to something outside. A bird or a vehicle, she couldn't now say which, but the room had a sound. The low hum of 20 or so people in a warm space doing ordinary morning things, and within that sound she had registered an irregularity. A chair, not moving away from a table. The way a chair moved when someone stood up purposefully, abrupt, sideways. The sound of weight unexpectedly transferred, of something that had been stable suddenly not being stable. One beat before the crash. She mentioned it when there was a lull in the conversation. Nancy's expression sharpened immediately, like he'd lost balance before he fell. Not stumbled, Carol said. More like, the decision was made for him, by his body, before his mind caught up. Nancy sat with that. Cardiac, she said, or neurological, or chemical, Carol said. Nobody said anything for a moment. You heard that from across the room, Nancy said. Before it happened. Nancy leaned back. I'm very glad you were there. So am I, Mary said. I'm always there, Carol said. I simply don't always say so. The doctor came an hour later. White coat, tablet. The practiced calm of someone trained to deliver information without inflection. She scanned the room with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for and found them quickly, which surprised Mary slightly, given how thoroughly they had been overlooked by everyone else. You were with Mr. Grant this morning, she asked. Mary stood. Nancy and Carol rose with her. Yes, Mary said. Is he? He's stable, the doctor said. The breath left Mary all at once. Thank God, she murmured. We treated him for a cardiac event, the doctor said. That's the working diagnosis. We don't yet have a clear explanation for the trigger. She looked at Nancy. You mentioned a smell. Nancy straightened. Bitter. Sharp. It cut through the bakery's normal sense. And that bakery smells very strongly of butter and almond and coffee. Whatever I noticed was distinct enough to register over all of that. The doctor looked at her for a moment, not dismissively, but with the assessing attention of someone deciding how much weight to give something. That's not something we ignore, she said finally. She made a note on her tablet. I'm ordering a full toxicology screen, she continued. That doesn't mean we expect to find anything. It means we're being thorough. Thank you, Nancy said. Someone may follow up with you. Medical staff or law enforcement. The doctor paused. You did the right thing staying. Then she moved on. The three women sat back down. That's more than I expected, Nancy said quietly. Mary nodded. She had expected to be listened to politely and then forgotten. That hadn't happened. Perhaps it was Nancy's voice, the precision of her, the calm authority that came from 30 years as a 911 dispatcher, 30 years of voices in crisis, voices in shock, voices that needed to be heard and directed and believed before the call could end. Perhaps it was Carol's stillness, which had a quality of authority that didn't require volume. Perhaps it was something else entirely. Whatever it was, they had been heard. Another hour passed. The room turned over around them. Some people leaving, others arriving. The steady circulation of a waiting room that never quite emptied. The man 2 chairs down was joined by a woman, who put her arm through his and didn't say anything. The young woman with the phone left in a hurry. The couple by the window were eventually led through the double doors by a nurse, the woman glancing back once before they disappeared. Mary watched all of it. She thought about Topher, about a man who came to a slice of Paris on a Saturday morning, because it was the one place in Vero Beach where nobody asked him about his dehydration, or his supplier relationships, or whether he'd considered expanding his hours. At M Bakery everyone wanted something from him. Here he was just a regular. Sam and Michelle had understood that without it ever needing to be said. They'd never once treated him like competition. They'd just made him coffee, and someone had used that against him. She thought about Sam and Michelle, somewhere over the Atlantic right now, entirely unaware. She thought about the woman with the red beads, who had been there, and who had not stayed. She held the image carefully, without knowing yet what it meant. The doctor returned. Her expression had shifted slightly, still professional, but with something resolved in it. Preliminary toxicology, she said. Nancy sat up immediately. There was arsenic present, the doctor said. A beat. Arsenic, Mary said. The doctor nodded. Trace levels, low, but present. The full panel is still running. We'll know more as those results come in. She paused. I wanted you to have that information. What does it mean for his treatment? Nancy asked. We are adjusting accordingly, the doctor said. That's all I can say at this point. She moved on. The three of them sat with it. Arsenic in Topher's system. The smell still unidentified. The arsenic unexplained, and Topher in a hospital bed with no clear picture yet of why. We're not back at the beginning, Mary said. We're somewhere we don't understand yet. Nancy was quiet for a moment. We still have the smell, she said. And the chair. She glanced at Carol. And what you heard. Then we keep paying attention, Mary said. Nobody argued. Because something about this morning, all of it, laid out in sequence, still didn't sit right. Not the collapse. Not the smell. Not the woman who had been standing near the door and was no longer there. Mary thought about what the morning had been before it became this. The warmth of the bakery, the guava pastry, the elderly couple at the window, Sam and Michelle's faces as they said goodbye, the particular lightness of people about to do something they had been looking forward to for a long time. 14 hours ago, she had been thinking about whether to get a second coffee. Now she was sitting in a hospital waiting room wondering whether a man she knew casually and liked genuinely was going to be all right, and whether the sharp smell that Nancy had noticed underneath the almond and butter had anything to do with why he wasn't. She didn't know the answer to either of those things. She had been a legal secretary for 20 years. She had typed briefs and contracts and depositions, had watched lawyers build cases from nothing, had learned to see the shape of an argument before all the evidence was in. She knew what it felt like to have a thread in your hand, without yet knowing what it was attached to. This felt like that. The truth hadn't finished arriving, not yet, but it was on its way. Chapter 4, North on Indian River Drive. Nobody suggested lunch right away. They stood outside the hospital in the bright October sun. The kind of sunlight that didn't ask how you were doing and didn't particularly care. Cars moved through the parking lot with ordinary purpose. A woman pushed a stroller past the entrance without looking up. A man in scrubs ate something from a paper bag on a bench near the sliding doors. The world was continuing. It always did. That was the part Mary found hardest, not the crisis itself, but the way everything else kept moving around it, indifferent and steady, as if nothing had changed because for most people nothing had. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed the outside air, and tried to let the tightness in her chest settle. It didn't, quite, but it moved. Nancy stood beside her with her arms crossed, not in defensiveness, but with the deliberate stillness of someone holding herself steady. She was looking at the road beyond the parking lot, not at anything in particular. Carol stood a half step behind them both, face tilted slightly upward, taking in the open air after the hospital's controlled interior. She had said nothing since they left the waiting room. Mary looked at her. All right? Carol lowered her face. Yes, better out here. The hum, Mary said. Among other things, Carol said. They stood for another moment. I need to eat something, Nancy said finally. Mary nodded. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. The kind of hunger that crept up while you were paying attention to something else. Where? She asked. Nancy looked north along the road. Let's drive. I don't want to sit somewhere we know everyone. Sebastian, Carol said. Nancy glanced at her. You read my mind. You said north, Carol said. And you said you wanted space. Mary almost smiled. Indian River Drive? Indian River Drive, Nancy confirmed. Nancy drove. Mary sat in front, both hands in her lap, watching the road unwind. Carol settled into the back with the unhurried ease of someone who had learned to trust the road by sound. They left the hospital behind and wound their way west through the residential streets of Vero Beach, then north to where Indian River Drive picked up along the western edge of the lagoon. The road narrowed almost immediately 2 lanes, old pavement, the kind of road that had been built before anyone thought roads needed to be wider than they were. To their right, the Indian River Lagoon appeared in flashes between the trees, flat and silver in the midday light, enormous in the way of things that had been here long before anyone needed them to be and would be here long after. Long wooden docks reached out into the shallows, most of them empty at this hour. A brown pelican stood on a channel marker post like a patient old man who had been there since before the road existed and planned to outlast it. To their left, the citrus groves began, long rows of trees heavy with October fruit, the smell of them reaching the car even with the windows mostly up, sweet and sharp and green, the unique smell of this stretch of coast, that meant you were somewhere specific, and not anywhere else. Carol had her window cracked. Citrus, and salt, and something else, wood smoke, maybe, from a distance. There's a fish camp back off the road, Mary said. We passed the sign. Carol nodded. October citrus. The quiet satisfaction of someone confirming something they already knew. The road rolled on unhurried, tree shaded in places, open and others where the lagoon spread wide, and the sky came all the way down to meet the water. An egret lifted from the shallows and flew low over the surface, its wings wide against the silver. Gone around a bend before Mary could track where it landed. Mary watched it go. She thought about Topher. She thought about arsenic. The word the doctor had said with such clinical certainty. There was arsenic present, delivered the way medical information was delivered when there was no better way to say it. She thought about what that meant, and then stopped thinking about what it meant because she didn't know enough yet. And thinking ahead of her information was how you made mistakes. She thought instead about the smell Nancy had described, sharp and bitter and wrong, something that grew somewhere. She let it sit with her the way the drive sat with her, present but not pressing. Nancy drove with both hands on the wheel, which meant she was doing the same. After a while a sign appeared at the roadside. Capt. Hiram's, 1580 US Highway 1, Sebastian. There, Nancy said. Capt. Hiram's had not been designed so much as accumulated. That was the impression it gave. A main building that had grown additions over the years as necessity demanded, each one slightly mismatched with the last. The whole thing ending up with a character that no architect could have planned, and that fit its location perfectly, low and open, the kind of place where the boundary between inside and outside was largely a suggestion. String lights ran along the eaves of the covered deck. A hand-lettered sign near the entrance listed the day's specials in no particular order. The parking lot was half full, a Saturday lunch crowd, and hurried. A row of motorcycles lined up near the entrance with the easy confidence of regulars who knew their bikes would still be there when they were done. An older man in a sun hat was moving a cooler from a pickup truck to a picnic table, with the focused determination of someone who had been planning this lunch for some time. They found a table on the deck. The water was right there, the lagoon spreading west toward the far tree line, close enough that you could hear it lapping against the dock pilings in a small, steady rhythm. A heron stood motionless in the shallows, one leg raised, waiting with the infinite patience of something that had never had anywhere better to be. The air smelled of salt and frying things and something woody from the bar. Carol folded her cane and settled into her chair. River's close. About 30 feet, Mary said. I can hear it moving, Carol said. And the pilings. She tilted her head. They're older. The wood sounds different from newer ones. Mary looked at the dock. The pilings were dark with age, barnacled at the waterline, the kind of weather that took decades. Yes, old. A server appeared. Roxy. Her name tag said. A woman in her late 30s, ponytail. The comfortable efficiency of someone who worked an outdoor bar in all weathers, and had long since made her peace with all of them. She looked at the table briefly. 3 women, lunch hour, no menus yet requested, and was already turning toward the couple at the next table when Nancy spoke. Excuse me, Nancy said. The server turned back. We'd like to order when you have a moment, Nancy said, with a tone that communicated the moment was now. The server's attention refocused. Of course. Sorry. Go ahead. Nancy glanced at the bar menu. Pinot Grigio, and a water. Mary nodded. Vodka tonic, lime. Water as well, thank you. Carol turned slightly toward the server. Is the chowder New England or Manhattan? The server's manner shifted slightly, a specific interest of someone who recognized a real question rather than a small talk one. New England. White. Made fresh this morning. The base is good today. Then I'll have a bowl, Carol said. And a double bourbon, 1 ice cube, and water. The server noted it all down without comment on the bourbon, which Mary appreciated. And a U-peel shrimp, Mary added, for the table. She moved off toward the bar. Nancy watched her go. She knows him, Nancy said quietly. Mary looked at her. How do you know? The way she'd paused at the shrimp. Nancy set down her glass. She recognized something. They sat with that for a moment. When Roxy came back to check on them, Nancy looked up. Excuse me, you mentioned the man who collapsed at the bakery in Vero Beach this morning. Did you know him? Roxy's expression shifted. The specific softening of someone who had been waiting to be asked. He comes in here all the time, she said. He was just in last night. Friday. Sat right over there. She gestured toward the far end of the deck where a table faced directly onto the water, and ate more U-peel shrimp than I think I've ever seen one person put away. 3 full orders. She paused. 3. I asked him if he was expecting company and he laughed and said no, just celebrating. Celebrating what? Nancy asked. He was in a good mood. Really good mood. She looked toward the far end of the deck. You know, I heard this morning that the couple who run a slice of Paris are heading to France this week. Sam and Michelle. She shook her head slowly. Tourist season's just starting up. Snowbirds coming back. Restaurants filling. Money moving again. And his competition's about to be without its best people for a month. She looked at the table. I'm not saying that's what he was celebrating. I'm just saying the timing fits. She looked briefly at her notepad. I hope he's all right. He always tips well and says please. Those are the things you remember. Roxy moved off. The three of them sat with what she'd left behind. Nancy turned to Mary. 3 orders. I know, Mary said, but I keep thinking about the timing of it. He was in a celebratory mood, eating a lot, and then the next morning he's on the floor of the bakery. Whatever happened to him happened fast. Shellfish poisoning can do that, can't it? Cause a cardiac event. Because the doctor said cardiac, and the arsenic could have come from the shellfish themselves. I read once that shellfish concentrate arsenic from the water. That's actually documented, Carol said. Bad shellfish and arsenic in the toxicology can look the same. There've been cases. Nancy looked at her. You think contamination? I think it's a possibility we have to get through before we can get to anything else, Carol said. But the smell doesn't fit. Shellfish poisoning doesn't produce a sharp bitter smell. Whatever Nancy noticed was something else. So either he ate bad shrimp and something else is also happening, Mary said slowly. Or the shrimp is a coincidence and we're looking at something else entirely. And the arsenic. The doctor didn't say it was high enough to cause the collapse on its own, did she? She said trace levels. Nancy said, present but low, which means either he ate contaminated shrimp the night before and they're picking up residual arsenic, Mary said. Or, and I think this is what you're both thinking too, someone gave him something that produced a similar result by a completely different mechanism. And the shrimp is just noise. Carol nodded once, and the smell points toward the second. Nancy said nothing for a moment, just looked at the water. Then we're not looking at an accident, she said finally. The word landed the way it was meant to. Mary was already reaching for her phone. She typed, shellfish poisoning cardiac symptoms arsenic. Carol had her phone out too. She double-tapped the screen and VoiceOver activated, reading aloud in its flat, efficient voice. She was trying to navigate to the hospital's website to find the toxicology department number. Main menu, VoiceOver said. Home, About Us, Patient Services, Billing. Billing, Carol said quietly. No. She swiped. Find a doctor, News and Events. No. She swiped again. Patient Portal, Login or. Carol closed the app. She had done this before. Tried to navigate an institutional website through VoiceOver while sitting in a noisy environment under time pressure. The websites were never built with her in mind. They were built with a mouse in mind, and a screen full of visual hierarchy that collapsed into a flat list of links. When read aloud, she switched to Be My Eyes instead, connected to a volunteer in approximately 40 seconds. A young man who sounded like he was in his 20s, calm, used to this. Hi, what do you need? I'm looking for a phone number, Carol said. Indian River Medical Center, Toxicology or Patient Services. She heard him typing. He found it quickly and read it out. Carol thanked him and ended the call. She had the number before Mary had finished reading her search results. The results came back fast for Mary. She read through them. Paralytic shellfish poisoning, neurotoxic shellfish poisoning, and then, further down, in a paragraph about toxicology and false positives. She stopped. Nancy. She turned the phone. Nancy leaned forward and read. Seafood, particularly shellfish such as shrimp, crab, and lobster, contains naturally occurring organic arsenic compounds. These compounds are non-toxic and are eliminated from the body quickly, but they can produce elevated arsenic readings in standard toxicology screens, leading to false positive results that must be interpreted in dietary context. Nancy read it twice, then sat back slowly. The arsenic wasn't arsenic, Mary said. It was shrimp. 3 orders of UPL, Nancy said. The night before, Carol said. Nobody spoke for a moment. The heron in the shallows lifted one leg very slowly, and set it back down in a slightly different place, reconsidering. So he wasn't poisoned with arsenic, Nancy said. No, Mary said. But we're back to nothing, Nancy said. Not nothing, Carol said. We're back to the smell. Nancy turned her glass slowly. Which we still can't identify. Which we still can't identify, Carol agreed. But which is real. Mary looked out at the water. The smell was real. Nancy had noticed it in the moment, before anything else had happened, before there was any reason to pay attention to smells. That was what mattered, not what it was, yet, but that it existed. He was celebrating something. The night before, things finally going right, Nancy said. That's what he told her. Mary stored it away. A man in a good mood. Content, the server had said. The kind that was quiet about itself. And then the next morning, the woman with the red necklace, and a piece of pastry, and the floor. She didn't say any of it out loud. Not yet. The server arrived with their drinks, and set a bowl of chowder in front of Carol, with quiet efficiency. The shrimp came a moment later, a pile of them, pink and steaming, a cup of cocktail sauce alongside. Mary looked at the shrimp. Nancy looked at the shrimp. Ironic, Nancy said. Yes, Mary said. They ate anyway, because they were hungry, and because it was good, and because the Indian River Lagoon was right there doing what it always did, moving, and hurried, indifferent and steady, and that was worth something even on a morning like this one. The chowder was, as promised, very good. Nancy set down a shrimp shell. We should call the doctor. Mary nodded. Tell her about the shrimp. She may already know, Carol said. She asked us to stay in touch, Nancy said. Mary picked up her phone, found the hospital's main number, worked through to the right department. The doctor, when she came on the line, listened without interrupting. 3 orders of UPL shrimp, Mary said, at a restaurant in Sebastian, the night before the collapse. A pause. That would explain the arsenic reading, the doctor said. Organic arsenic from shellfish. It's a known interference. Another pause. Thank you. This is helpful. The collapse itself, Mary said. Still no explanation? The broader screen is still running, the doctor said carefully. We'll know more in the next day or two. Mary thanked her and hung up. She set the phone on the table. The arsenic is gone. Nancy nodded. And the smell remains. Something else, Carol said quietly. Across the water, a boat moved slowly north along the lagoon, its wake spreading in 2 quiet lines behind it, reaching the dock pilings long after the boat itself had disappeared around the bend. Mary watched until the wake settled. She thought about a man celebrating a Friday night at a table on this deck. 3 orders of shrimp. Things finally going right. She thought about the woman at the bakery who had not stayed. She thought about a smell that didn't belong. She didn't say any of it out loud, but she didn't let it go either. They stayed long enough to finish lunch and let the afternoon settle around them. Then Nancy paid the check, and Carol unfolded her cane as she rose from the table, and they made their way back through the parking lot to the car. The drive south on Indian River Drive was quieter than the drive up. Not tense, just thoughtful. The lagoon kept pace with them on the left, steady and unhurried. The kind of thing that had been here long before any of this, and would be here long after. Mary watched a great blue heron standing in the shallows near a weathered dock, motionless, waiting, knowing, apparently, that patience was the whole job. She thought that was probably right. She settled back in her seat and watched the road, and filed away the things she couldn't yet use, the way Carol filed things. Just shapes. For now. Chapter 5, The Garden Knows. By mid-morning, the air had already settled into that familiar Florida warmth. The kind that didn't ask permission so much as quietly take over. Mary parked beneath a stretch of shade that wouldn't last long. It's already hot, she said, turning off the engine. Nancy opened her door. It's October. This is what passes for seasonal change. Carol smiled as she adjusted her sunglasses and reached for her cane. The air feels different. It is, Nancy said. Just, not in a way your thermostat would notice. They made their way toward the entrance of McKee Botanical Garden, where a small chalkboard sign leaned beside the gate. Spooky Plant Expo, toxic, thorny and mysterious. Now this, Mary said, is either going to be fascinating or mildly alarming. Both, Nancy replied. Inside, the garden opened around them in layers, palms, water, winding paths, and the quiet hum of people moving slowly, reading signs, pointing things out. It was peaceful in the way only places designed for pause could be. The light came through the canopy in shifting patterns, dappled and warm, the kind of light that made everything look slightly more beautiful than it would somewhere else. Carol was already reading the garden as they walked. Water featured to the right, she said, and something flowering, sweet but sharp. White blooms, Nancy said, glancing over. Oleander, I think. Mary frowned slightly. That sounds familiar. It should, Nancy said. I'm pretty sure that one's not friendly. Define friendly, Mary said. Nancy shrugged, as in, don't eat it. Good rule. Carol lifted her face slightly toward the scent. She was already cataloging, not the visual, but the scent, the weight of the air, the texture of the path underfoot, packed dirt here, then fine gravel, then the edge of something wooden at the path's margin. She catalogued each thing as it came. They followed the path toward a small cluster of people gathered around a guide, holding a laminated board. A sign beside her read, "Dangerous beauties, plants that harm." Well, Mary said quietly, that feels direct. They joined the edge of the group. The guide was a woman in her 50s, unhurried, clearly at home here, with the ease of someone who had spent years making complicated things accessible without making them simple. She smiled as they approached. Perfect timing. We're just getting into the interesting ones. Nancy leaned slightly toward Mary. That's never reassuring. A small boy near the front of the group was already peering at the first plant, with the focused intensity of a child who had decided this was worth his full attention. He was perhaps 8, with the kind of energy that expressed itself as stillness when something genuinely caught it. The guide gestured toward a large, glossy-leafed plant in a ceramic pot near the path's edge. Deep green, full, the kind of thing that sat in the corner of every waiting room and office lobby in America. Let's start with something familiar, she said. Has anyone had one of these at home? Several hands went up, Mary's included. Dieffenbachia, the guide said, also called dumb cane, common houseplant. Very pretty. Also, if you chew the leaves, it causes temporary swelling of the tongue and throat severe enough to prevent speech. A beat of silence moved through the group, hence the name. The guide added. A man near the back laughed, short and surprised. His wife elbowed him. Where does it grow naturally? The boy asked. Tropical regions, Central and South America originally, the guide said, but it thrives indoors in low to moderate light, which is why it ended up in every office and waiting room in America. It actually prefers indirect light. Put it in full sun and it struggles. Put it in a dim corner and it's perfectly happy. She paused, which is part of what makes it so common. It's almost impossible to kill through neglect, except by eating it, the boy said. Except by eating it, the guide agreed. Mary looked at the plant for a moment. Mine's been looking terrible since I moved it to the patio, she said. The neighbors had their trees pruned last spring and now it gets direct sun in the afternoon. She shook her head. I'll have to move it. Nobody said anything. It wasn't particularly interesting information, but Mary held onto it anyway, the way you did when something suddenly had a name. The boy at the front looked up. Why would anyone chew a leaf? Children and pets often do, the guide said, without any condescension. They don't know yet. That's why it matters that you do. The boy nodded seriously and turned back to the plant. I had one of those for 6 years, Mary said. In your living room? Nancy asked. On the kitchen counter. Nancy turned back to the guide. Is it harmful just to touch? Generally not, the guide said. But wash your hands after handling it, and keep it well away from pets and small children. The sap is the issue. On skin it can cause irritation. In the mouth, well, that's where the name comes from. Mary made a small sound. I'm going to think about that every time I walk into a dentist's office now. That's the idea, the guide said pleasantly. Carol spoke from just behind Nancy. What does it smell like? The plant itself. The guide considered the question with the quality of someone who found it genuinely interesting. Green, she said. Faintly bitter if you get close. Nothing that would warn you off. That seems like an oversight, Carol said. Nature doesn't always provide warnings, the guide said. That's rather the theme of today. She moved them along the path to where a large shrub grew in a wide terracotta pot, its branches drooping under the weight of long, trumpet-shaped flowers, pale yellow, enormous, almost theatrical in the way they hung, as if they had been designed specifically to be noticed. Angel's trumpet, the guide said. Carol turned her head toward it. Even from several feet away, the scent reached her, heavy and sweet, with something beneath it that was almost narcotic. Not unpleasant, overwhelming in a way that made her take a half step back. Every part of this plant is toxic, the guide continued. The flowers, the leaves, the stems, the roots. It contains alkaloids, specifically scopolamine and atropine. That can cause hallucinations, rapid heart rate, extreme disorientation, and in serious cases, much worse. It's beautiful, Mary said, and it was, genuinely, extravagantly beautiful, the kind of plant that stopped people on sidewalks. Yes, the guide said. That's rather the point. Does anyone actually grow this? Nancy asked. Oh, frequently, the guide said. It's a very popular ornamental. People grow it along fences and trellises all over Florida. She gestured at the pot. It prefers full sun and well-drained soil. Sandy Florida soil suits it perfectly. It grows fast, blooms heavily, and handles the heat without complaint. From a purely horticultural perspective, it's an ideal Florida plant. She paused. Which is why you see it in so many gardens. Nancy looked at the flowers for a moment. And people wonder where Florida man comes from, she said. A few people in the group laughed. A woman near the front was photographing the flowers with her phone, holding it at arm's length, leaning in closer than seemed wise. The guide watched her with a patient expression of someone who had seen this before. From a safe distance is fine, she said pleasantly. The alkaloids in this plant, the guide continued, have been used historically both as medicine and as poison. In very small, controlled doses, scopolamine has legitimate medical applications. In larger doses, or without any control at all, it's extraordinarily dangerous. What's the smell like? The boy asked. Come closer, the guide said. The boy leaned toward the flowers with the careful bravery of someone who had been told something was dangerous and was determined to assess this for himself. Sweet, he said. Really sweet. Like, he thought about it, like something you'd want to eat. Exactly, the guide said. That's the problem. The boy stepped back looking satisfied. He had confirmed the danger himself. That was enough. Carol's fingers moved slightly on her cane. She had caught the scent too, filed it, held it, heavy and sweet and something beneath that she couldn't name yet. The guide led them to a low, feathery-looking plant a few steps farther along. Its delicate fronds arranged with a kind of architectural symmetry that looked almost designed. Sago palm, she said. Mary recognized it immediately. She had walked past dozens of them without a second thought. You'll see these everywhere, the guide said. Front yards, parking lots, median strips, shopping centers. They're one of the most widely used ornamental plants in Florida. She paused. They're slow-growing, drought-tolerant, and they thrive in full sun to partial shade, sandy soil, coastal conditions, heat. They handle all of it without complaint. For a Florida landscaper they're almost perfect. Low maintenance, architectural shape, stays neat. She looked at the group. And one of the most toxic plants in existence. They're also one of the most toxic plants in existence. Every part is poisonous, but the seeds especially. Ingestion of even a small amount can cause liver failure. In humans, it's serious. In dogs and cats, she shook her head. Even a single seed can be fatal. The group went quiet in a different way than before. Not amused, just still. A woman near the back made a soft sound of distress. I have 3 of those, she said. In my front yard. My dog runs through there every day. The guide's expression was kind but direct. Then I'd recommend speaking with your landscaper, she said, or your vet, who can tell you exactly what signs to watch for. The woman had her phone out before the guide had finished speaking. Nancy turned to Mary. I have seen those in every parking lot in Vero Beach. Most people don't know, the guide said. That's part of why we do this. Carol spoke quietly from beside her. How quickly do symptoms appear? In pets? Within hours, the guide said. Sometimes less. That's why it's so dangerous. By the time most owners realize something is wrong, significant damage has already been done. Mary thought about every dog she'd seen sniffing around a parking lot median. She didn't say anything. Neither did Nancy. Carol nodded once, slowly, the way she did when she was storing something she intended to keep. Mary found herself doing the same thing. And she wasn't entirely sure why. She had come to a botanical garden on a pleasant October morning. Because Nancy had suggested it and the alternative was sitting at home checking her phone for updates on top of that never came. She had not come expecting to learn anything useful. And yet something about standing in front of these plants, beautiful, ordinary, deadly, kept snagging at a thread she couldn't quite see the end of. The guide moved them on. Now, she said, holding up an image, a small, bright red seed with a black tip, perfectly round, almost glossy. Has anyone seen these before? A few people nodded. Rosary peas, the guide said. They're used in jewelry and crafts because they're so striking. Bright red, black-tipped, perfectly uniform in size. You'll find them in craft stores, on imported jewelry, in decorative pieces. She gestured toward the display. The plant itself is a climbing vine. It loves full sun and sandy, well-drained soil. In Florida it grows wild along roadsides and forest edges, twining up fences and shrubs. It's considered invasive in some parts of the state because it spreads so readily. She paused. Which means if you're walking a trail in South Florida, and you see bright red seeds scattered on the ground, now you know what they are. Nancy leaned close to Carol. Small, smooth, red with a black tip. They really do look just like beads. You can see exactly why someone called them rosary peas. Carol nodded slowly. She had visual memories of rosary beads from years ago. The particular shape and weight of them, the way they move through fingers. The description fit perfectly. She filed the match carefully. They're also extremely toxic, the guide continued. The seeds contain aberrin, a compound similar in action to ricin. One damaged seed, if ingested, can be enough to cause serious harm, even death, in sufficient quantity. Nancy straightened. Wait, people wear these? Routinely, the guide said. As long as the outer shell remains intact, they're generally considered safe to handle. The danger comes if they're broken, crushed, or ground, which releases the compound inside. So beautiful and dangerous, Mary said. Nature specializes in that combination, the guide said lightly. It serves the plant, attractive enough to be dispersed, toxic enough to discourage consumption. Evolution at its most pragmatic. The boy had been studying the photograph with great seriousness. So you could wear them, he said, and be okay. But if they broke, then you'd want to wash your hands immediately and seek medical attention, the guide said. Yes. The boy looked at the image for another moment, then at the guide. Is there an antidote? Not a specific one, the guide said. Treatment is supportive, managing symptoms while the body processes the toxin. The boy nodded. He had the expression of someone filing information for later use. Carol's fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her cane. Describe them again, she said, to Nancy. Nancy looked at the image once more. Small, smooth, red with a black tip. Very uniform, they all look exactly alike. That's what makes them useful for jewelry. And striking. Carol nodded slowly, storing it. Mary glanced around the group as the guide moved on. The boy still absorbed in the photograph. The woman from the back still holding her phone. The man who had laughed earlier now looking less certain of himself. And at the outer edge of the group, slightly apart, a woman in dark clothes who had not reacted the way everyone else had reacted. No intake of breath at the toxicity figures. No glance at a neighbor. No phone out to photograph the image. She had simply stood, composed, still, watching the guide with the careful attention of someone reviewing information she already had. The guide moved to the last plant of the tour, the oleander they had passed on the way in. White blooms catching the light, branches full and glossy. The kind of shrub that decorated half the driveways in Florida. Oleander, the guide said. Nerium oleander, one of the most common ornamental plants in the southeastern United States. Hardy, beautiful, low maintenance. She paused. And highly toxic in every part. Flowers, leaves, stems, roots. Even the water that cut stems sit in. Even the water? Mary said. Even the water, the guide confirmed. There are documented cases of illness from people using oleander branches as skewers for roasting marshmallows over a campfire. She let that sit for a moment. The smoke from burning oleander is toxic as well. Nancy exhaled softly. Good to know. In terms of growing conditions, the guide continued, oleander is almost perfectly adapted to the Florida environment. Full sun, salt air, sandy soil, drought. It handles all of it. It grows fast and blooms repeatedly through the warm months. You'll see it along highways, in medians, in front gardens, lining driveways. She looked at the group. It's the default choice for a reason. It does everything right, except be safe to eat. The compounds responsible are cardiac glycosides, the guide said. They interfere with the electrical system of the heart, disrupting the signals that regulate heartbeat. In sufficient quantities, they can cause serious cardiac events. A phone rang. Not a discreet vibration. A full ring, twice, and then a woman's voice, carrying with the ease of someone who had assessed her surroundings and found nothing requiring discretion. Yes, I know. That's why I'm calling. A pause. The shipment isn't here yet. I need more time before we can proceed. Another pause, shorter. Push the date. 2 days at minimum. Tell them family emergency. I don't care what you tell them. Just push it. Mary looked up. The woman was standing perhaps 8 feet away along the path, back half turned. Phone pressed to her ear. Well dressed. Dark bag. Not looking at anyone. The guide raised her voice slightly and continued. The flowers have a mild, not unpleasant scent. Nothing that would make you think twice. The pieces aren't ready, the woman said. I need time to prepare them properly. Nancy pressed her lips together. The boy near the front looked between the woman and the guide, visibly uncertain which adult he was supposed to be paying attention to. Mary felt a flash of pure annoyance. This was the part of the tour that mattered. This was what they had come to hear. The woman didn't lower her voice. She didn't move away. She simply continued her conversation because a tour group of strangers, 3 older women among them, was not something that required her consideration. Fine, the woman said. Just make sure it holds. I'll be in touch. She ended the call, dropped the phone into her bag, and moved off along a side path without looking at anyone. The guide's expression remained composed. As I was saying, she said pleasantly, that's rather the problem with oleander. It looks ordinary. It smells ordinary. It grows everywhere. And it's one of the most dangerous plants you're likely to encounter in everyday life. Mary watched the woman disappear around the bend. She felt the irritation of it more than anything. The complete absence of acknowledgement. The casual certainty that 3 older women on a garden tour were simply not worth noticing. Carol was very still beside her. What does it smell like? Carol asked the guide. The oleander itself. Sweet, she said, faintly. Nothing that would warn you off. Carol went very still for just a moment. The smell of the bakery, butter and sugar and coffee, and something beneath it, sweet but wrong. She filed it carefully, without conclusion. Just a shape. Not everything dangerous announces itself, Carol said. The guide smiled. No, it doesn't. Mary glanced toward the path ahead, and that's when she saw her. A woman stood just beyond the group, slightly apart, well-dressed, but not flashy. Dark bag held close, composed, still, red nails resting on the bag strap, and around her neck. Those, Mary said quietly. Nancy followed her gaze. The necklace was unmistakable. Bright red beads, perfectly uniform, each one with a small dark tip, almost glossy in the afternoon light. Rosary peas. The woman wasn't looking at the guide. She was watching the group. Not in a way that was obvious. Not in a way anyone else would likely notice. Just, still, the same stillness Carol had noted. Carol shifted slightly. What is it? She asked. Nancy hesitated. There's a woman, standing off to the side. The one who was on the phone. Mary kept her voice low. She's wearing those beads. Carol went very still. The red ones? She asked. Yes. Carol nodded once, slowly. Interesting, she said. The woman turned in, as if sensing attention, and offered a polite, entirely neutral smile before stepping away along a side path. Nothing about it was overtly strange. Nothing anyone could point to. And yet, Nancy watched her go. Huh, she said. Mary exhaled. What? Nothing, Nancy said. Just, memorable. They lingered as the group dispersed, standing in the easy quiet of people who had just absorbed more than they expected to. The boy was still there. He had his notebook out now, a small spiral one that had appeared from somewhere in his jacket, and was writing in it with the focused purpose of someone documenting field research. His mother stood beside him, watching him write. She caught Mary's eye and smiled, the particular smile of a parent who had just seen their child genuinely lit up by something. Surprised and pleased in equal measure. Mary smiled back. Carol took a slow breath, letting the sense of the garden settle around her. Water, earth, something faintly sweet and something else just beneath it. Not unpleasant, just sharp. As they moved back toward the main path, Mary glanced once more in the direction the woman had gone. She left, she said. Nancy nodded. Yeah. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she moved toward the path. What was her voice like? She asked. Mary blinked. Her voice? If she spoke, Carol clarified. She didn't. Nancy said. At least not that we heard. Carol nodded slowly. She was on the phone, Carol said. During the oleander section. Mary looked at her. You were listening. She was loud enough, Carol said. Something about a shipment. Needing 2 more days. A family emergency that wasn't. She paused. I didn't know what it meant. Neither did I, Mary said. They both stood with it for a moment, the not knowing sitting alongside the knowing, the way it always did when something mattered before you understood why. Nancy glanced back down the path, though the woman was long gone. Well, she said lightly, maybe she just really likes plants. Mary smiled. Or jewelry. Carol didn't respond right away. She took a slow breath. "Let's keep moving," she said. They did. Back into the winding paths, back into the quiet beauty of the place. Behind them, the sign still stood, "Dangerous Beauties," and ahead of them, without their knowing it yet, the same woman, the same necklace, the same detail, waiting to be noticed again.